Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday for our latest Sparking Conversations in Educational Leadership webinar. For those who've not been a part of these webinars beforehand, I'm Sean Slade, one of the two heads of education for BTS Spark in North America. Our other head of education, Alyssa Gallagher, is operating the chat function, and so she can answer any questions that come in via that. But I think we're in for a quite enjoyable conversation today as part of this topic around creating a culture of care. For those who have been part of our webinars before then, we've changed the format slightly today. One thing you should be able to do, at least in theory, is get half of the screen or less than half of the screen with the PowerPoint operating, and also the other half being the panelists. There should be a button where you can slide across, and so that way you can either have it be predominantly the panelists or predominantly the slides, and the slides are there to guide the conversations along. We're also going to have, as I mentioned before, the chat box open, and also any time that you want to pose a question, we are going to end at about 1/4 with some Q&A from the audience. So enter those questions, if you have them, into the Q&A function, and then we'll pose those to the panelists towards the end of this session as well. But as I mentioned, I believe this is going to be an engaging conversation. It was one of these times when, as we're warming up for these conversations, it was hard to keep the panelists quiet, which also probably means that once they get onto camera and we'd like them to engage, they may lose their voice, but hopefully not. So this topic around creating a culture of care is one that's near and dear to my heart. It sort of relates a lot back into things that I've talked about for many years around school climate and culture. And the guests that we've invited in today are people that span being educational psychologists, to superintendents, to leading national associations, all with a focus around developing cultures which are supportive and cultures which promote learning as well. As we always do with these webinars, we spend the first couple of minutes just sort of framing why we're tackling this conversation. And we typically put an article out at least a couple of weeks before, which actually outlines our frame of reference for this topic as well. Now, the truth is that schools need a culture of care now more than ever. You know, our schools and our communities and our society have been through a lot. And for many of us, we were thinking about the pandemic being perhaps a one-year issue that we had to deal with, but now we're coming into the second year of dealing with the pandemic, not to mention the racial unrest and other things happening in the country. And a lot of that burden is falling down back onto our educators, our schools, and our school leaders. And we talked about this in our well-being webinar, about how there are high proportions of not only teachers and educators that are being burnt out, but also principals and superintendents. Now, the truth is that there's not a lot that we have control over in our schools, at least around, say, policies or accountability. But what we do have control over is the climate and the culture that we develop. And as you walk into a school as an educator, you can quickly understand what the climate and the culture is like in that school by the feeling, the atmosphere, the noise, the artwork on the walls. And the same thing applies whether you're a teacher or whether you're a student or whether you're a parent. So climate and culture is something that's in our control. We can do something about it. But as was mentioned here in this article that came out as well from Edwig that we quoted, you can't deep breathe your way out of a pandemic. You cannot stretch your way out of a terrible class size. And you cannot individual behavioural way out of structural problems. There's been this tendency, and it's not a wrong tendency, but there's been a tendency, especially this year, to almost put the onus of your care back onto the individual. Now, that's good in a way, because you should be looking at the burden that you have to put up with in your role as an educator or as a school leader. But it shouldn't always be back on the individual to solve those problems. There was another article that came out just recently, and in fact, we're not the only people to write an article around this topic. There was a great one by Peter DeWitt in EdWeek this week, talking about time to declutter your practices and what should you be discarding, what should you be keeping. There was another article by Jennifer Wu Brannan in EdSurge talking about how we make our schools more human again. And so there are ways that we can start to look at this. There are ways that we can start to gauge whether we should be looking at structural changes or whether we should be looking at self-care by the individual. And my preface is that we should be looking at both, but we should definitely be looking at the structural changes that can take place. Because when we start to make changes in our climate, in our culture, in our schools, and we make them more inviting and safe and secure places, it doesn't just make the individual feel better, it actually produces better outcomes. People feel more engaged, they feel more connected, they have more of a voice, they take more risks, they start to challenge current thinking, they start to innovate more, their happiness increases, their engagement. And then, as we know from research, if the learning environment is safe and supportive and engaging, then you also get learning outcomes skyrocketing. So what we're talking about today really is, how do we make education, which is this human endeavour, how do we make it more caring? How do we make our systems more caring? How do we create a culture of care in our schools so that we can actually harness the skills of all of these teachers? Because a culture of care is necessary in the best of times, and to be honest, in these current times when we're all stressed, it's really an imperative. We've brought together, I think, quite an amazing panel this time, which I'm sure many of you know or recognise these people. Michele Borba is an educational psychologist and a former teacher who has spoken to over 1 million parents and educators. I imagine that wasn't at the same time, Michele. I imagine that was over a number of years. And she's really focused around strategies for raising resilient kids. You may have heard her on the Today Show or on Dr. Phil. She's a frequent contributor. Michele and I were actually together as part of the NBC Education Nation up in Baltimore a couple of years ago. And something that I'll be referring to as well, her latest book that came out earlier this year is focusing on thrivers and the surprising reasons why some kids struggle and others shine. So welcome, Michele.
Thank you.
You're more than welcome to turn your cameras on as well as I start to introduce you, so people can put a face to the fantastic bios. We also have Deb Delisle. Deb Delisle is the president and CEO of the Alliance for Excellent Education, which is a Washington, D.C.-based national policy, practice and advocacy organisation, really focusing on ensuring that all students, particularly those who are traditionally underserved, graduate from high school. Deb and I worked together at ASCD for a number of years, where she was the executive director and CEO. And before that, she was the Assistant Secretary of Elementary and Secondary Education from 2012 to 2015. So she comes with a wealth of experience and a wealth of knowledge. And we didn't even talk about her role in charge of Ohio schools for a number of years. So welcome, Deb.
Hey, everybody.
We also strive to get the voice of practitioners as well. And so we're very honoured to have Zandra Jo Galvan, who's been serving as the superintendent of Greenfield Union School District in California since 2017. Now, we couldn't fit it into your bio here, Zandra, but I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you began your teaching career at Greenfield Union, and you actually were a student from kindergarten through 12 at Greenfield Union School District. Was that correct?
That is correct.
Okay, well, you live and breathe Greenfield, which is wonderful. She's a national advisor for the Future Ready Schools, which is an initiative coming out of the Alliance for Excellent Education, and a frequent speaker on topics covering, and you can read them here, social justice, equity, dismantling racism, wellness, sisterhood circles of empowerment, which we want to hear more about, and uplifting the next generation to thrive in our world. So welcome, Zandra. And last but not least, we also have Matt Miller, who's the superintendent of Lakota Local Schools in Ohio. And he spent the last 27 years serving Ohio communities as a range of roles: superintendent, director of student services, an instruction principal, teacher, and is also connected back to the Future Ready Schools as a lead advisor. He was named an SBA top 20 to watch in the nation, and had his first TEDx talk entitled "Don't Buy the Book, Cultivate Heroes and Go Open." So welcome, Matt.
Thanks, Sean. I am excited and honored to be here. Thanks for having me.
And Matt, just before we start off as well, did you go to Lakota Local Schools as a student?
No, I did not, but I was born and raised in Cincinnati. I'm a proud graduate of St. Xavier High School.
Okay, wonderful. Well, great to have you all. The way we're going to do this as well is we're going to start off with just a quick round of 1-minute responses so we can get the panelists talking, and you can start to hear their responses. So the first question we're going to ask is basically, what does this phrase mean to you? And it can be creating a culture of care, it can be creating a culture or culture of care. And you'll notice as I go through this that with the slides will change color. So it gives you a nice, friendly, hopefully, recommendation of when to stop talking after about a minute. So if I pose this question to you first, Michele, I'm going to hand the microphone over to you to get your response.
Oh, creating a culture of care. I think we can get into some highfalutin philosophical stuff, but the best answer I've ever heard came from a 15-year-old. I asked her, what kind of a place did you need when you're struggling and you're depressed? She said, it's a real bad TV show my mom watches, but man, the opening song is exactly what every kid needs. I said, what is it? She said, well, the TV show is Cheers. And the place is, and it's all about a place where everybody knows your name and everybody's glad you came. And I went, oh my gosh, that's it. That's exactly it. It's about human attributes. You can see it and feel it when you walk in. In fact, there's just one simple thing, STICK. Take a group of kids, walk through your school. Within 2 seconds, you can see a culture of care with just the engagement and the smiles. T, the kids can tell you about it. We love this place. I, it's inclusive and it's inviting. C, it's a community of feeling and tone. And K, it's all about kindness. That's what it is, and the rest will come.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, and there's, well, we shouldn't say, I was going to say there's something to that. Of course, there's something to that. We all want to be in places where we feel supported, we feel respected, and we feel like we belong. And every educator can tell within, we say 5 minutes, it's probably honestly within 30 seconds of walking in a school environment, and they know, they can sense the culture of care. Fantastic. Deb, why don't we turn it over to you for a minute?
Yeah, thanks. I just love what that 15-year-old said. So thanks for sharing it, you know, where everybody knows your name. And I'm reminded so often of the Russ Qualia's surveys he's done around our country, and is very sad to report that as kids go up in grade levels, they feel really disengaged. In fact, 32% of high school kids feel like there is actually somebody in their high school who cares about them. So the topic is really essential. We probably should ask them if somebody even knows their name, right? So for me, simply stated, building off of what was just said, relationships matter, and they matter a whole lot. You know, people are not going to follow or learn from somebody whom they believe just doesn't care about them. And kids know. You can go into a middle school and ask, who loves to be here, which adults love to be here, right? And they will tell you, and they're pretty accurate on that. And, you know, we've talked so much about caring environments, but it doesn't always display itself in our schools and systems because we're living in a society that's just too obsessed with test scores. And if we lived this caring environment, so many kids would not be facing the amount of stress and trauma we're now seeing. So thanks for bringing this up. It's just such an essential topic. And I agree. I could walk into school, and I visited thousands of schools in my career across this country, and I know immediately whether or not it's a caring environment, and most especially if it's an environment in which I would want my own kid to go.
Mm-hmm.
And if the answer is no to that question, when I ask myself that, then we shouldn't allow it for other people's kids. So it's all about what we do to create these caring learning environments.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny, you were mentioning about knowing names. I recognized a former colleague of mine, Sarah Trubridge, who I worked with at Western over in California, in the chat box, and we worked with Bonnie Bernard for a number of years. And one thing we did with Bonnie was we went around schools and we asked the kids, how do you know if someone cares about you? And one of the kids came up and said, I know if someone cares about me if they know my name. Mm-hmm. And it's like, that's a fairly base level of caring.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a lesson, if I could just add this, Sean, I remember a lesson I learned when I became an elementary principal, and I had asked a long-standing elementary principal who seemed to be really a strength in that community, like what made it successful. And he said, you know, it's about relationships. And he told me that every day he went into every kindergarten class, and his goal was by the end of that second week to know every kid's name. And then he started the next 2 weeks on understanding one thing about what their home life or their, you know, what was their favorite animal. And I watched him one day doing, I heard like it was not really trained well, whatever the case may be. So all of those just focusing solely on are you going to get into the college of your choice? What about academic content?
Exactly. Wonderful. Zandra, we're gonna pass it over to you to get your take on this.
Sure. So for me, it's all about the vibe you pick up on when you walk into a space. When you walk into the district office, when you walk into a classroom, when you walk into the school office, it's that vibe you feel when somebody looks at you and smiles and acknowledges you. The culture of care is when you're present and you listen to people. It's when you take the time to build relationships with people so that they know you care about what they're doing, who they're about. You ask them questions about their life and you remember it the next time you see them. It's the leadership modeling what that looks like. When I say leadership, I'm a superintendent. I model it for my admin team. I model it for my teachers. I model it for my families. I'm a hugger, so pandemic kind of hurt me a lot because I didn't get to hug on people a lot. But when they see me coming, they already know I'm loud and I'm proud and I'm super honored to be their superintendent, but I model that for them. And that's the culture of care that we get to breathe, we get to live through, and we get to just model for everyone within our community.
Fantastic. And I really want to touch on during this talk as well, the role that school leaders can take in developing that culture, because sometimes we look at things and we think, that it will happen if we put these clubs in place, or it will happen if we do this every day for the assembly or for the class meeting. But there is a role that the school leader should take and has to take in developing these cultures as well. And Matt, you've now waited for about 10 minutes, so we're gonna give the floor to you.
I will try to clean it up the best I can, Sean. And just the energy on this panel is amazing. It's like inspiring me. So thank you to everyone that's on the panel for that. You know, my initial reaction, just listening to the three previous speakers, was, you know, the relationship piece before they went into it. But I also think it's how do the adults treat other adults in the building as well. So when we're talking about kids and students and knowing our kids, what do we know about the adults too? Because I think that's a huge piece of this that is also really important. And how does that school, when you're building those relationships with adults and with kids, how does that school feel? Does it feel like an institution, like a hospital, like a prison, or does it feel like a place where we want our kids and we want to go back to every single day if we work in that building or in that district? I think it's it can be very unique. I have 23 buildings, and every one of those buildings is unique, but usually it's because of the leaders in that building, but also the adults that work there too, from top down, and just the vibe that they give off, and how are they treating one another, not just teachers to students or staff to students.
Wonderful. Yeah, and I agree. I think we've got a great panel here, and I think we're going to have some engaging conversation as well. So we're going to jump straight into just some general discussions. I'm going to pose some questions, which you can see on the slides as well. And the first one, I took this from your book, Thrivers, Michelle, and so maybe you'll be the first one to chime into this. And you listed out there 7 character traits that set Thrivers apart, and things that many of us will be familiar with: self-confidence, empathy, self-control, integrity, trusty, perseverance, optimism. And so I've posed 3 questions to start this group off, which are, if these are the desired traits for our student success, should they also be the needed traits for our educators and school leaders? And then to follow on with that, and you can pick up any of these to respond to, what environments are going to help grow such traits in both our students and our educators? And the last one, which, I didn't share this with you beforehand, I added it in yesterday, because we see these traits come up time and time again with 21st century learning or whole child approach to education. Does focusing on these traits actually help develop these caring environments? And I have my biased answer, of course, but I'd like to hear what the 4 of you say. Michelle, I'm going to hand it over to you first, and then I'm going to open up to anybody to respond.
Well, first of all, those 7 traits were chosen because they are the most highly evidence-based characteristics of students that are going to be ones who are more resilient. They're all teachable. They're highly correlated also with peak performance. So there you go. There's the base. And we also know that the base of those needs to be that caring place. Should we start with the worksheets with the kids? No, we need to start with ourselves, because we do know that the best way that we can teach character to a student anyway is through our own example. We need to tune it up on ourselves. There's a principal in Temecula who I love. What she's doing is she's taking each one of these traits once a month, but she's starting at a staff meeting with asking the staff, what's that look like to you? How are you going to be able to emulate that to your students? Because our kids are watching, and maybe the greatest question we can ask ourselves, if our kids had only our behavior to watch every night, what would they be catching? I hope it's us, because character is lying dormant. There's a lot of adults behaving very, very badly these days. Tune it up, and we're going to have a kid who's got the heart, mind, and will, and that's where those traits came from.
Wonderful, wonderful.
Can I just jump in and say hooray on bringing up adults? I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
So one of my great concerns right now on this big SEL movement across our country, 2 things. I have 2 big concerns about it, and it really relates to what you just shared. Number one of which is people will say, oh, you know what, we do SEL every day on every Friday at 1 o'clock, check the box, we're done, as opposed to embedding all of the essential components of SEL. But I have seen a lot of adults in systems who are hurting themselves, particularly, after the past 18 months with the pandemic. I have found people who have lost colleagues, who have struggled themselves with family members, or they've, had a partner or somebody else in the household who lost their position. All of these things have come to play. And we jump in to say, what are we going to do for kids, as opposed to also taking care of adults in the system? And we know that culture eats strategy every day for lunch. We know that, right? And I remember walking into a school once, and people were telling me, oh, this is a great school. They take great care of kids' hearts. And I was walking down the hallway, and the whole building seemed to be filled with dead plants in the hallway. And I thought to myself, what do they do to the hopes and dreams of kids if they can't even keep a plant alive? So this whole issue of character development, optimism, and I love the optimism being included on there, because when people say to me, what's the role of an educator? I sum it up in one word, which is hope. Offer kids hope every single day. But if you don't feel hopeful about your own career, your personal life as an educator, that bleeds into what you do. And kids get a sense of that. So please, let's take care of adults in the system as well.
I'm going to jump in, and sorry, Zandra, if we're going in any order, I just blew it up. And so, Sean, I apologize. I'll probably never be invited back. But
no, what is needed. Talk when you need to.
To Deb's point, our kids are handling this pandemic better than the adults are. And so, not that they don't have their struggles, they certainly do. But the venom from a lot of the adults around this is just out of control, as everybody knows. That's a whole other topic. But our kids are handling it much better. They have their issues, they have their struggles, but we have good people in our schools that can help get them through it. And then the other thing I want to throw into, and Deb beat me to it, is of the 7 character traits, I love optimism the most. I don't know if that's intentional at the bottom that you get to that, but as educators, we are nothing if we are not merchants of hope and optimism. And so I think if we exude that to the rank and file, so to speak, just to get literal, then I think that helps too with the building, with the relationship piece, and certainly with the culture.
Yeah, I echo what you're saying, Matt. I often describe myself as a cynical optimist. I think there's a bit of cynicism comes by nature through my family, but I don't think any of us would be in education if we weren't optimistic. Zandra.
Sure, I'll add to that since we're the boat kind of thing. I think to think about where people are coming from, and we cannot assume what people went through during the pandemic. And so pre, during, and post, there's so many situations, right? And I will say this, I think we're all, when they say, oh, we're all in the same boat. No, we're not. We're not in the same boat. We're in the same storm. We're in the same storm together, but might have yachts at home. Some of us might have a little tugboat. Some of us might have, a little rowboat with a crack on the bottom. So many different things. And so we can't assume the struggles that people have gone through is what I want to share. Is so the adults in our community, when teachers are going through things, it trickles down to the classroom. When our bus drivers are going through a struggle, it trickles into the classroom. And so all of that is so important with that care component. So one thing that I did, and we'll just stick with the theme of, we love on our kids. Absolutely. We're doing a lot of things for our kids, but let's go with the adults as we mentioned here. So one thing that I'd like to just share that we did in Greenfield with our adults is that we went into looking at these qualities here that you see there and how do we make them optimistic? How do we make them look forward to the next day? And so we just asked them, what do you need? What do you need? When I go into classrooms, I say, how are you first? Before I say, what's the learning target? How is the teacher clarity? Are the students engaged? I look at you and I say, how are you? How's your family? If you start with that, it lowers that effective filter for our team leaders, and it allows them to just take a deep breath. And another thing that I'm sure we'll share some here is I'm really into self-care and fitness and wellness for the adults. I'm a model of that when I do it, and I'm unapologetically a superintendent who will do that, because if we don't do it, others won't follow, because they see us as people that should just be 24/7 grinding at the computer or doing other things, right? So with that, I opened it up to staff and I said, what do you need to be optimistic? What do you need to stay true to yourself? And they said, can you bring some wellness classes? And I said, absolutely. So I hired local trainers, hired a nurse to come and do fitness classes. And so we're doing yoga every week. We're doing Zumba. We're doing strength training. And that is putting our money where our mouth is. Are those ESSER dollars, this last round of ESSER dollars, are all about kids, community, and the adults. So how we use them to best get closest to the people who impact kids is essential. And they're super happy that we're doing that. But the thing is, I got to get them out of their rooms. I got to go haul them out of there and say, come on, fitness is starting at 5:30 because they're so into their lessons. So that's I'm going to start some kind of a competition to make sure that they get out there. But little something I can share with y'all.
Yeah, wonderful. I love that idea of asking them as well. It's like for so many years now, we've said you should just ask the kids what they need. I think the next battle we have is actually asking the teachers what they need. We assume that they're fine, or asking, ask the principals what they need. I don't think the principals get asked very often either. And the other thing that you tapped into there was when you start to ask, or when you start to role model or behave, because you're a superintendent or the head of an association or a well-known speaker, you are giving it educational credibility because you are doing that, so it allows others to do it as well.
Yeah. Can I share one example of something? And it isn't from a school district, but I worked at the U.S. Department of Ed. The federal government shut down. Hopefully it's not going to shut down because it's not a great experience. And so the folks who were career staff at the time they couldn't come into work. They weren't getting a paycheck or whatever. And one of the program directors who was over rural and migrant ed, I won't share her name because I've not asked her if I could share this story, but she was phenomenal. And I would call them all the time, every single day, and we'd have an open kind of mic situation to just see how people were doing. She knew her staff so well that she actually would meet at a local Starbucks, buy them coffee just to see, did they need food? Did they need help? Were they meeting their bills? And then she actually served almost like a social worker for these adults. She had some of the highest scores because the federal government always asks how people are feeling about the work. She had some of the highest scores. I thought, that's what we need in our schools and any system in which you're working, to be sure you take care of the adults first. And I know there are several comments on here about how do you if we can't take care of adults first. And I agree with Matt. Adults have not handled this as well as kids. And, we always talk about teaching kids something. We also have to be sure that our adults find great joy in their work every day. They ought to be walking in and saying, like, I'm the luckiest person to have you kids in my class. And you can see that particularly when kids start getting tracked and they feel like, oh, I'm not great at math. I'm in the lowest math class or whatever. When a teacher walks in and says, oh my gosh, I'm so excited. We're going to learn about what you do in high school algebra because I'm going to teach you equations. And the kids are like, really? I'm going to do high school work? But that enthusiasm, right? Singing songs, and we've seen kids getting special handshakes. We ought to do that to adults. We welcome kids off of the bus. We ought to stand in the parking lot and sit today and say, you know what? I'm so excited, Michelle, you came to work today, because any one of those teachers can walk out on any day. They can walk out and say, I'm done. I'm sorry, I can go on and on. I get so excited when people are talking about taking care of adults.
Oh, I agree 100%, and that's what we're talking about. Here's the question though, and I'll jump on to the next question if I get my clicker working properly. How do we start to develop cultures so it's not only up to the individual person in charge of that school or that district to manufacture this? How do we start to actually develop cultures where caring is just part of the DNA? This is a quote that touches on that from Jen Swinecki, that talks about, the principal being a lonely job. And yes, it is. It's almost like the higher up you get in that hierarchy, the fewer connections you have. But it shouldn't be. And so what I want to hear from the four of you now is, how do we start to develop these communities or these connections, these networks, which either can be virtual or even better can be geographic in the same school or the same district, so that people feel connected?
Well, I think one of the things we can do, Sean, is for the connectivity piece, and to use this example on your screen, and you alluded to it just a few minutes ago, the principal job is key to the building, and oftentimes they're the biggest middle manager, right, between the teaching staff, between central office, and sometimes they get squeezed in the middle. And so I think developing networks, not just within the district or even the grade band if you're in a large district, but regionally, to your point about making the time for them to collaborate, to network. I've been struggling with something for my principals. I need them to get, those of us of a certain age remember the TV show MASH. Towards the end of MASH, there was Sydney, who was sort of the therapist for some of the guys and gals that were on the show. I need a Sydney to come in and talk to my principals one-on-one about, what do you need? They don't need leadership coaching per se. They need mental health coaching or wellness coaching and something like that. So if anyone has any ideas, either on the panel or in the chat feature, if they could throw something in, I would love to kind of tap into that and delve into that for my principal.
I'll share a little.
Go ahead.
Okay, so I'll share a little bit about like how do you take care of your principals too. And so for me, it's about letting them feel that they're not alone on an island. I think a lot of what we carry so much every single day. And when we go home, there's so much renting space in our heads, right? You get home and you want to be there, you be your full self for your family, but it's tough because a lot of the things that we're dealing with, we have to pivot on a dime, and we have to figure out what's next. And so what I'll do on a weekly basis we'll check in with our principals, but I want them to check in with each other. I need them to talk to each other, our assistant principals to talk to each other, our counselors to talk to each other, our teachers to talk to each other, and really talk about what's on your heart today, and what's heavy on your heart, what's heavy on your mind. What are those things? And we huddle. We huddle when we can, because if it's holding on and it's renting space in your head, then what happens is you can't do anything else because it's so heavy. And it could be a parent that did something. It could be a kid that did something. It could be something in your personal life, and you carry that with you. And so creating circles of trust for them to be able to have that conversation, then you're not alone. Someone else is doing it. If I talk to Deb and I are struggling with the same thing, and Deb tells me, oh my God, this is what's happening. I was like, me too. I thought I was the only one. And then we co-share the labor of really coming to a solution with whatever that thing is. And I will touch on, because I see it here on the slide, sister circles. I am so proud of being in like 4 different sister circles. And I'll tell you, one of them is a fit leader circle, fit hermanas. I am Latina. So I found sisters all across the nation, from Texas, from Tennessee, in California, where we do things together and we support each other. But we also drop in a text, I need some help with this. And so we lean on each other. I have a sister circle that we're presenting actually here at Alas in DC on how do you create one? How do you simply create a space where you can trust on other people? So we're doing a workshop here at a conference just to tell other people how to do that. And it doesn't have to be this grand Zoom calls. We don't even do that. We're mostly texting each other with things that we need support with. So those are just a couple examples of like how circles can really empower you as a leader. And when I say again, leader, I'm talking about the cafeteria workers, a leader supporting kids, the principal's a leader, absolutely. And you mentioned here, frontline administrators, you get it. Frontline administrators get it hard. You get gut punched a lot. And so we need to, in our role, to make sure that we're helping you do a better, taking care of yourself so you can better serve others. And never do I ever, when my principals ask, can I have a day off? It takes a lot to ask for that day off, first of all. And second of all, I always say yes, because that's their mental health day. When you get sick with a broken leg, you're out. Well, when your mind is hurting and you're feeling sick about something, you need to take that time for yourself.
Yeah, wonderful. Michele, I'm curious, when you were talking about developing those characteristics, those traits, and your focus very often is talking to parents, is there something in there that relates back to the ways that school leaders, principals, superintendents can behave? Is there other environments that you talk about with parents that can relate back to the school setting as well?
Whenever I'm talking about either to the parent or to the principals or to the staff, one thing I think that we fail to realize is that we've become so GPA focused and test score oriented that many times we need to take 2 steps back and realize the reason why we want to create the caring culture. What's the real value of it? Once we know the why and the because it reduces stress, because you'll get kids more engaged, because your children need it right now, because their affect disorder is just really so high right now, because your behavior problems will go down, because they'll be more eager. All of a sudden, there's a greater buy-in. Then people start to get together to realize it's not either or. Either we hit the test score or we do the caring culture. Both matter, and both together are what are going to really create the kind of environment that's going to raise up a child who thrives, who's going to be more resilient, and you're going to get far better results. I see the biggest issue is that there's still a misnomer that resilience can be taught, that it's not locked into DNA, and it needs the protective buffer of a school. Oh my God, in many cases, it's the best hope that they've got. The classroom and the teachers themselves who are modeling that, the rest will come. So it's kind of like 2 steps back, and then it's like, aha, we got this.
Yeah, and when you're talking about resilience, it's establishing those environments that allows resilience to actually flourish. And
Yes.
one thing that we know from resilience theory is relationships, the power
Yes.
of relationships, someone that cares about you, someone that believes in you.
Well, just a little sideline on that. I think there's 3 Ps, because sometimes we get too caught up into it's all about the program. Oh my gosh, we're going to be teaching this particular coping skill. But when we really look at children who are able to thrive despite extraordinary adversity, who become kind of invincible despite their vulnerabilities, they've got 3 things going. One of them is someplace they've got a protected place that they've gone to, a haven like a school that they can reduce the stress. The second is caring champions in their lives, people. And many times that is the teacher, that's the custodian, that's the bus driver who smiles at them. And then they've also learned protective factors or those buffers or the coping strategies along the way, or problem solving or hope. You put all those three things together, you've got a kid who's going to be able to endure despite whatever comes their way.
Exactly. This is going to lead us on to the next question, which is about relationships. But Matt, you were talking about wanting to discover the skills that the leaders can develop to help their climates and help their environments. And it's one reason that I came to work at BTS Spark as well, was that it really starts to focus attention on a group of people that I think we've not focused attention on. And that's, how do you develop these teams in your school of leaders and educators that can actually thrive? And what skills do we need to develop? So all of the work that we do at BTS Spark is really looking at that whole educator and that whole leader. So maybe we should chat afterwards, Matt, and we can share some expertise.
Yeah. And that wasn't a setup question or anything.
Thanks, Ray. I appreciate it.
Feels like that probably to everybody that's on here, but it really wasn't. And I mean, I brought it up to my executive team several times now, and it's time to get started. We need to quit talking about it.
Yeah, and I know that, so this question also comes from Thrivers, and it starts to talk about how do we grow our school culture to be infused with care and relationships, and how much of developing Thrivers is based around relationships. But I think the last question here, I think, sort of taps into a little bit of what we were talking about, because we often, as you were saying, Deb, focus on the students, which we need to do, but we often focus on the students and ignore the teachers. Or even in some of the better schools, we focus on the students and the teachers, but we ignore the school leaders and the principals and the administrators. So can we change our culture if we leave out some of these key stakeholders, is the question for anybody.
I think absolutely we can't ignore anyone. This is a community endeavor, and I'm not necessarily, I think reaching out beyond the school walls is really critical, but also when you think of your place as a learning environment, right? So I resist when people will say, oh, faculty and staff, meaning staff like they have a different role because they sit behind a desk and answer a phone. Everybody ought to be included in this notion of we are a learning and thriving community. So we've got to focus in on this notion of creating a thriving culture and asking people, I laugh when I hear things like, oh, we have a teachers meeting every Monday or the first Monday of every month. Why are we calling it a teachers meeting if a principal stands up and just talks at people? If it's a teachers meeting, then let teachers plan the meeting, what they need. Like those kinds of things are really critical. And the relationship piece is absolutely so essential. It's like how you greet kids every day, right? It's doing various duties. It's celebrating people. It's, going into a staff meeting and doing kudos where people could thank one another, writing them on Post-it notes, having a thank you board saying, kudos with like, I really like the way you helped me do blah, blah, blah. And I just think so often of schools I've been in, sometimes I'll go into a school and I think, see school, where some of the kids will learn. Because if you believe in hope, then every kid's going to learn. And it just is fascinating to me about it. So I've always believed that what we offer to our kids tells them what it is that we value. And I remember talking with a superintendent. I visited a school several years ago. And I said, how do you jumpstart this culture? Because the culture across this community was just unbelievable. And he said, I actually came out one day and I said to folks at the beginning of the school year, I don't want to see a textbook out. I don't want to see a syllabus out. I don't want to see anything academic going on essentially for the first 2 weeks of school. And then where teachers were like, oh my God, what am I doing? I'm going to be behind our third grade assessment, blah, 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 the whole bit, right? And I said, why did you do that? He said, because it's so important to build relationships. And so, he also said to me, I never ask anybody to do anything I wouldn't do. And he said, if I show up an hour early to our convocation, I'm moving tables, I'm cutting bagels, I'm helping people do that while I'm also greeting parents, etc. And when you go into some really, especially in impoverished school districts where family members might not have had the best experience in school themselves, so they don't show up, then go to them and show people that they care. So I can go on and on, as you can say, but it's just everything we do is about taking care of people's hearts, whether they're big hearts or little hearts or growing, right? It's everything you do. And when you ask people, why do you like working there? It's not, oh, I like, well, maybe the pay matters, right? But they don't come out and say, I like the pay, or I get coffee every Friday, or whatever the case may be. They talk about the environment. It's the same if you ask your own kids what it is that, you know, they remember most about school. They'll talk about that kindergarten teacher who went to their first varsity soccer game, or the fact that the administrative assistant showed up in the hospital to talk to the mom when the mom was suffering from cancer. It's those emotional ties that we have to people. They don't come out and say, oh, I love Mr. So-and-so because I memorized the states and their capitals, right? So we have to infuse this with care relationships. And I'm afraid that if we don't spend more time and pushing on this as a priority across our country, I am afraid that we're going to fail another generation of kids. And if that doesn't get to you, just remember, these kids are going to take care of all of us as senior citizens. And I don't know about all of you, I don't want to drool and I want my socks to match. So kids care. We just have to teach them how to act upon their caring. And we can't do that if we don't model that for kids. So for adults, I'm sorry.
And I just want to back up what Deb was saying. Amen and yes to all that. But the other thing I'll say too is what we remember is the good and the bad. So we have to make sure that we're fostering, nurturing the good. So when we think about our own experiences, or when our kids or even the adults talk about their own experiences in education, and what do you remember, we got to make sure that it's more of the good than the bad.
Sean, can I add thank you for taking the first chapter of Thrivers Focus on Who, Not What. That again came from a kid. And I asked him, why do kids feel so empty these days? And she said, because so many times parents focus on what they want us to be as opposed to who we are. And it became to be this aha moment of too often we focus on deficits and weaknesses. That if we really want to build confidence in relationships, it's starting with understanding who our staff members are, who our kids are, what brings them to the plate. And that who piece seems to be the core of creating that commonality of a community. If we even take a moment and recognize that. One of the coolest things was Murray Elementary, when they said too often we are focusing in on when the kid walks in, here's their cume folder, and we know all the stuff about their test scores. So what they did is they just made a pack of index cards, one for each child with a ring on it. Every single teacher said, all year long, what we're going to do is just fill out each kid's strength as to who they are, what they love to do, what brings them joy, where are their interests, where are their strengths. And then we're done. It takes us 9 months to figure this out. We're going to pass the card on to next year's teacher. Every teacher said that's the best thing that they ever saw. Well, a principal said that's the other thing we're not doing right with our staff. We're not recognizing who each of us is, what would each of us can bring to the plate. And if we just focus a little bit more on our strengths as opposed to our deficits, we create that community where we can all join in and contribute.
Beautifully said. Yeah, beautifully said. I'm going to call out now. We don't have any questions in the Q&A. So if anyone wants to ask a question, you need to put it in there reasonably quickly. And I'm going to jump the slides ahead a little bit. And I'll tell you the reason why. We had some other questions about tokenistic ways of dealing with stress, and we could talk for a long time around that, but I want to play this little video, and if we do get other questions in from the audience, I'll go to their questions, but if not, I want you to respond to this, because I've had this, it was in last month's webinar and I didn't get to play it, and it's in, so now I'll put it into this month's. But Scott Cassoni is the superintendent of West Orange Board of Education, put this out to his staff before the school year. And I just think it's a really nice way of developing these cultures of care in your community. And I hope that I pressed the right button so the volumes works for everybody. But if it doesn't, you can let me know.
Hey, good morning, West Orange Public Schools professional community. Dr. Cascone here, coming to you from one of my favorite spots, a place where I come to decompress and to find peace and calm. And as we enter into this school year, I would say to you, find your beach. on a daily basis, whatever that may be, whether that's a place, whether that's an activity, a person, a thought. Find your beach day in and day out. It's going to be very important as we not only maintain a level of balance for ourselves, but also that we're able to model and reflect that for, our students in our community. We know that after this unprecedented 18 months, our students are going to be coming back to us, and in some cases may have been changed, at least temporarily, by the experiences that they've had over the course of the last 18 months. And so as we open up, let's focus on the little things. Let's focus on the beauty and the joy of those interpersonal interactions and the relationships around us. Let's build a solid foundation of social emotional stability and well-being before we really dig in and start to kind of do the hard academic work that we know lies ahead of us.
Yeah, I love that little message, and I love the fact that he's on the beach doing it as well, and there's the waves behind it. So any responses from our panel?
The other thing, I just love this, I think of like, where's my beach, find your beach. The other thing I would say that I keep in mind is, every one of us has had multiples of these, but every one of us has had a student who can't forget because of what we didn't give to them. Their lives were whatever it was. And, you try really hard, but there are kids whose needs were never met under your care. And I carry that kid with me every day. So mine is, the child's name was Kai, a 6th grader. And it doesn't really matter. She's not had a great adulthood. And I was like, my God, could I have made a difference? So I carry Kai in my heart every day. And my thing is, find your Kai. You need that why of what you're doing. So find your Kai. So it's not just where you can find refuge, but also dig deep inside. I'm a big proponent of Simon Sinek and his why theory. But find that one student, and it could be your own child whose needs were not met by somebody. Carry that kid in your heart every single day, because that's why you do what you do. And you just got to persevere and think, okay, for me, it's like I might have failed Kai, or I didn't give her everything she needed at that moment in time. So I'm going to be sure that I'm going to meet Matt's needs and Zandra's needs and Michelle's needs and Sean's needs. So I don't have another Kai that I'm burdened with every day.
I love that, Deb, and I'll show you behind me here. You see my wordle here. I'm all about all means all, and so how do we help support all levels of the organization through our actions? And I saw that in the chat too. Like where we put when you look at your plan, when you look at your strategic plan, when you look at your core values, your mission. Like some of our core values in Greenfield are: we're not going to let each other fail. We're going to cultivate the culture of every single individual. We're going to just do all the things possible. And so I'll share with you a few action steps that we do just to put our money where our mouth is, right? And so when we ask people that we want to make sure that we're changing mindsets across schools, it has to happen at all levels. It can't just happen at one school or in one program. So in order to do that, some of the things we do for kids is we've partnered with local organizations within our community. And worldwide, I'm sure you guys have heard of Blue Zones. And if you haven't yet, you totally have to look that up. The Blue Zones Project is about healthy living, how to care for each other, core values about family. How do you nurture your family? How do you find a core hub of people? How do you give your permission to do the things that take care of yourself so that you can come with the full cup to then love and your organization? And so a few things that we do is Greenfield, where we are, is Monterey County wine country. So they have wine at 5 for the adults. And so we go on a walk, and then you go to the winery after 5. Simple things like that. They host things with students and their families coming in and learning how to make a salad, and they give you free vegetables. And so all of these wonderful things rich in our Salinas Valley of agriculture that we can do with them. The other thing is with staff. What do you want to do? They want to smile, they want to laugh, they want to do things. And so what did we do? Even during the pandemic, we hosted a comedian. Yes, we did. We hired a comedian. We sent them popcorn and candy and all those good things that they were watching a show, just as if they were at a comedy show. And we did things like that because we wanted them to feel good. And what did we raffle off? Let me tell you what we raffled off. We got with our partners, because we all have engineers, we all have architects that build our buildings, we all have people that sell us their tools. So they donated money. We gave away a Peloton. We gave away iPads. We gave away Apple Watches to the people in our organization because they needed to feel that love and just to smile. So how do you change the mindset? It's one school at a time, but it's not leaving anyone out. All means all.
Wonderful. We're going to have to move on. We always run out of time in these things. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to jump ahead, and I'm going to give you 1 minute each. You've already preempted that a little bit, Zandra, which is fantastic, but 1 minute each about actions that people can take in their school setting to create a culture of care either tomorrow or next week. And Matt, why don't we start with you?
I think, Sean, that really it goes to amplifying the successes of our kids and of our teachers and staff. So when somebody does something good, spread that out. Talk about what they did. Talk about, it's not just successes. It's not just rose-colored glasses. But I don't think in public education, in my case, we amplify that out enough. So whether that's social media, whether it's a personal note, whether it's just a verbal conversation, I think that's something that we all can do tomorrow.
Wonderful. It's almost like saying actions speak louder than words.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, a little bit.
your action is show your actions, do some actions.
Yeah, let's talk about the good.
Yeah, wonderful. Zandra, do you want to summarize quickly, 1 minute? What some of your actions be?
I'd follow what Matt just said, is just highlight your people, highlight kids, use social media to your advantage, highlight your people in your organization, the humans that serve, the community members. I just launched a really simple 60 seconds in GUSD, short snippets of interviews with people, highlighting what they do, and then that's what the parents get to see.
Fantastic. Deb?
I just go back to always asking and, centering yourself every day and saying, is the school good enough for my own kid? And if the answer to that is no, figuring out how to make it better so that other people's kids don't have to be in that environment. And I so agree with, Matt and Zandra, and I'm sure with Michelle would reiterate, just take care of people and take care of yourself, but take care of people. And when you say, I have you back, have their back. And set yourself up to have others be able to say yes. Just set yourself up to let others be able to say yes. And also show your vulnerability. We could have another whole conversation. I'd love to ask on Michelle's points around this notion of, as educators, we feel like we have to be perfect at all times. And so when a lesson or a big unit of study doesn't work, it's like, we'll just scrap the whole thing, as opposed to, oh my God, like I just learned I shouldn't do A, B, and C, but how can everybody else help me? So we have to also show our own vulnerability. Keep at it. I'm sure the people who are on this webinar are the ones who are caring for our kids. So I think after we have to step back and just say, how can I bring 5 more people along in this big endeavor to just create these caring communities?
Exactly. It's a human, we're in a human industry. Education is all about humans and relationships. And so it's really emphasizing the human side of leadership in schools as well. Michelle?
Oh, I think what we need to do is realize we're difference makers and we can make a difference. And I think we need to reaffirm each other. We're often so discouraged and we just keep looking at those CDC stats and we're like overwhelmed. Maybe it's starting each staff meeting with this, what's worked. Simple little things. I remember just briefly one psychologist who said, you have got to keep affirming to teachers what differences we can make. He said, I had a kid who was absolutely catatonic. I spent hours and hours and hours trying to talk to this kid and I never got anywhere. And one day was my last day. I left a Coke with him because I was getting a Coke and I said, have a good day. I'm so sorry I can't be here anymore. He was catatonic because of the abuse that was so horrific that I won't even get into. And he never blinked. He never nodded. He never looked like he was responding until he said, the psychologist said a couple of months later, actually a few months later, the school bus dropped off right outside where I went to the next place to do my psychology training. The bus driver stopped and said, hey, are you Dr. Johnson? There's somebody who wants to say something to you. And all of a sudden I looked up at the bus, he said, the windows rolled down, this kid sticks his head out and said, hey, Dr. Johnson, it's me, Ryan. I'm just meaning to thank you for the Coke. He said, I almost passed out at the time, but it was that once in a lifetime moment that every teacher went, wow, we do make differences. Little teeny moments at a time, we need to keep reaffirming it. That's what keeps us going because that's why we're there. because we love kids dearly. We're concerned about them, but we can make differences. We just got to get on board together.
Yeah.
Sean, can I ask, do we have 1 minute, 30 seconds? I really want, I've known Matt Miller a long time, and he's an incredible leader. I would join him and walk across hot stones for him. But I want Matt to share the example of the therapeutic dogs, because sometimes we have to think outside the box in how we secure resources. So Matt, can you give 30 seconds?
Yep, Deb, you're way too kind. In Lakota, we are lucky enough to have 7 therapy dogs for our students. That's how it started out, but it also goes for our staff. And I keep telling people, and I'm not kidding, I want to get 23 dogs, 1 for each building. Just the magic that the dogs work with their kids. And so sometimes it goes to the kids that are the neediest or who are lashing out, either verbally or physically, that the dogs are really good with, but just the general interactions that kids have. And I have one of them that lives with me, goes home with me, but I take him to a different building every day. Because it gets me into the buildings, and it's a good icebreaker, especially for like high school kids that don't want to talk to the superintendent. But if I have Biggs, my therapy dog, with me, then that opens up avenues in conversation too. So the foundation we work with is called Circle Tail here in Ohio, but there's hundreds of them out there, and I would encourage people to check that out. Thanks, Deb.
Fantastic. Yeah, I have a therapy dog as well, but he happens to be our own personal dog. You know, having a dog is great therapy, really is. All right, we're gonna start to sum up right now. I just wanted to touch on very briefly, the actions that we would do from BTS Spark as well, and these came out of the article that we put out, and it's going to refer back to a lot of the things we're talking about. Acknowledge individuals, show your human side of leadership, learn to adapt your style, and provide some training professional development. As we say, put your money where your mouth is a phrase that we've often heard. And it sort of goes back to, I think it might have been you, Matt, that was talking about how, where you put your money and where you put your emphasis tells the students exactly what you think is meaningful in the education system. And the same thing applies to adults as well. I'm not going to spend much of time on this at all. I'm just going to touch on it very briefly. We are now hosting an open cohort pod on this topic, which will launch end of this month. Goes for 4 weeks, 90 minutes each, directed at school leaders, principals, superintendents, experienced teachers. We will be sending out a brochure around it, all trained and facilitated by professional coaches as well. And then next month, what we'll be starting off doing is a brand new webinar that will follow these webinars about a week or 2 later, which we'll be calling Sparking Action in Educational Leadership. So we'll have the Sparking Conversation, which talks about the theme, and we'll have Sparking Action, which is really focused on some quick and simple things that people can do in their school setting. I want to thank our panelists. They were as engaging as I hoped for. I didn't have to be too optimistic to hope for that. Luckily, we choose some really fascinating talkers, and we could have gone on as always for another hour. All of these get recorded, and this should be up hopefully by tomorrow, if not by Friday, up on our YouTube channel. And all of those, no matter whether you're talking about listening to Michael Fulton in last month, or Andy Hargraves around wellbeing, or Tiffany Anderson, or Peter DeWitt, we've had some really great speakers. They're all up on BTS Spark YouTube channel. So with that, I'll say thank you very much to our wonderful panelists, and we've gone overboard by a couple of minutes, but I'm sure you'll forgive us because the conversation was I found it really enriching. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Be well,
you.
everybody.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.